But so Marko goes to California. He hightails it, right? And what he ends up telling me, and I'm like, well, are we ever gonna get married? And he's like, honey, I waited till you're 18 and I went and talked to your father about it first, and that's the craziest part about it. Like, it was so hard for me to ever imagine my parents being criminal. So like, even when he said that to me, I was completely oblivious. So, anyways, that's kind of the fucked up part about it. I did get injured. I did get caught in the crossfire, but the government was fucking shooting at us too. Was it gangs, Los Pueblos, like, cartels, you blame it on this, that, and the other, like, maybe to some degree, and maybe like a turf, and maybe she's my girl, like, there's some element to that in degree, and I was definitely used for that, and I know that. Like, I know how I know everybody, and that's why I'm just like, I tell the truth about it. If I don't like you, I tell you why. If I like you, I tell you why. And then I go, and then their threats start. So like, there's no winning. Like, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And there are some reasons, like, that are completely justified when you want to see somebody fucking die. But when you want to see me fucking die, that's not cool. And maybe you wanted to see me die so that you could ensure my father's temper was contained. But you have to also understand he was still a saint to so many people. But once they got that vote and they started manipulating it and that nationality, they took it for granted, and they started treating us, their workers, their true culture, their identity, like shit, like a nuisance. Like, we had to answer to them. Like, you could start ripping our kids away and our families apart. And I know there's stuff there that I can't even compute because I was a kid. And I can remember being Catholic, though. I remember going to church. So like, there's some parts of it that are just like, it was a conflict of interest too for a lot of people. Thanks, Marko.